I'm going to continue with Oneness versus the 1% by Vandana Shiva and Kartikey Shiva. When we practice Earth democracy based on local living democracy, the principle becomes applicable to all societies and all communities. In Earth democracy, humans cannot prosper if the Earth that nourishes them is being destroyed. In Earth's democracy, one species cannot exploit or exterminate others. One gender, one race, one religion of humans cannot become great by denying others the freedom, respect and dignity that are their rights. People in India and across the world are responding with a new politics of localisation and self-rule. They are engaged in an enlightened response of putting globalisation in its ecological and social context. In region after region where foreign investment is diverting local resources from the survival needs of local communities to the boundless appetite of global markets, people are putting investment to the test of ecological and social accountability. They are redefining the principles of governance on the basis of decentralised democracy. The rule of the World Bank and the WTO has implied the rule of superstate institutions serving the one-sided interest of commerce and the 1% beyond and outside the democratic control of people. As the state withdraws from environmental and social regulations in the free trade era of environmental and social justice laws are suspended in the name of ease of doing business, communities are organising to regulate commercial activity by asserting their democratic rights to decide how these resources are used. They are redefining democracy in terms of people's decisions in their everyday lives. They are redefining the nation in terms of the land and the people, rich in their diversity. The trend towards localisation was in fact born at the same time as the trend towards globalisation. If globalisation is the corporate-driven agenda for control, localisation is the countervailing citizens' agenda for protecting the environment and ensuring people's survival and livelihood. In the absence of regulation by national government, citizens are creating a new politics for introducing ecological limits. Localisation has an inbuilt environmental component for the control and ownership of local resources, a decision-making component for the utilisation of these resources, and an economic component that resists the destruction of local economies by the global economy and international trade. Movements for localisation are giving rise to a new people's ecological protectionism, which is fundamentally different from corporate protectionism, in which all institutions of society, courts, the police and government departments are distorted to protect the interest of transnational corporations, TNCs. In each sector now, the biggest transnational corporations have been forced to recognise that it is clearance from citizens, not just from governments, that is necessary for democratic functioning. Coca-Cola was delivered that message in Plachimada, in Kerala. Monsanto Bayer received that message each time it tries to manipulate the Indian government into pushing the GMO seeds and patents on life. Whether it is fisheries or aquaculture, toxic plants or toxic imports, land grab for factories or real estate, real trade and the entry of TNCs which threaten people's livelihoods, resources and health, local communities and grassroots movements are resisting. As their resistance resonates in village after village, from one investment site to another, a new environmental philosophy based on the democratic decentralisation of control over natural resources is emerging. Pressure from people is forcing the government to recall its role as protector of public interest and the country's natural and cultural heritage. Localisation is emerging as an antidote to globalisation and to unrestrained commercial greed. It is reasserting itself as a democratic option of the future. 2016, I was invited to Barcelona, Spain, to participate in the initiative called Fearless Cities. The invitation said, In a world in which inequalities, xenophobia and authoritarianism are on the rise, towns and cities are standing up to defend human rights, democracy and the common good. Democracy was born at the local level, and that's where we can take it back, this time as part of an international network of refugee solidarity and hope. This is how the planetary freedom movement is evolving and will grow from the bottom up, decentralised, self-organised and interconnected. As millions are uprooted and become refugees, they seek shelter in other places. The refugee crisis is being used to polarise societies based on a politics of hate. It is only the deep consciousness of being Earth's citizens that becomes a source of love in times of pervasive hate, of interconnectedness in times of violence, separation and division, of hope in times of hopelessness, of create and compassionate ways of dealing with refugees. The dualism created by the mechanical mind prevents us from imagining that we can be both local, rooted in a place, and planetary in our consciousness, that we can be distinctive and unique individuals while we are part of one humanity. That global integration does not have to be vertical, where the 1% extracting life and freedom from nature and society and crushing those who support them, but the planetary and horizontal unity of consciousness and compassion, of interconnectedness and interbeing. Gandhi imagined it as an ever-expanding, never-ascending oceanic circle. Life will not be a pyramid with an apex sustained by the bottom, but it will be an oceanic circle whose circle will be the individual always ready to perish for the circle of villagers, till at last the whole becomes one, like composed of individuals, never aggressive in their arrogance, but ever humble, sharing the majesty of an oceanic circle of which they are integral units. Therefore, the outermost circumference will not wield power to crush the inner circle, but will give strength to all within and will derive its own strength from it. Swadeshi, the resurgence of real wealth, real work and well-being. Swadeshi is the Indian word for local living economies, for economic sovereignty and economic democracy. Swadeshi is based on local economies that grow into national economies and finally into planetary economies in alignment with nature and people's real freedoms, real wealth, creation and well-being at every level. Creating economies that work for the 99%, not just the 1%, is an ethical, ecological, economic and human imperative. Self-reliance was an important aspect of the Swadeshi movement in India. It was both the commitment to produce what is needed and to buy only Indian products, as well as boycott the British clothing. The big shift taking place around the world is from the structural violence of the money machine to non-violent economies, from forced globalisation, degrading the environment, to localisation through which we become co-creators with the earth to produce more and better food, clothing, shelter and mobility for all. Initiatives in ecological economies, the transition movement, and local currencies and economies for the common good are all striving towards the resurgence of real economies that increase great wealth defined by well-being. The resurgence of real wealth must be based on the recovery of the commons and on the creation of new commons that are beyond the reach of global corporations and the centralising, privatising corporate states. 20 years of corporate globalisation based on the WTO rules written by the toxic cartel and the agribusiness cartel, combined with 5 decades of a toxic cartel driven non-green revolution, has pushed Indian farmers to the brink. Instead of revisiting the unfair rules of globalisation and trade liberation, the corporations that created the distress are trying to turn the crisis into an opportunity to expand their profits and control. They want long-distance trade and contract farming to lock every farmer into slavery. They seek to intensify industrial farming and its monoculture. They are proposing one agriculture, one market, a slogan embodying monoculture and monopolies that governments are picking up as a new development. Gandhi defined Swadeshi as the spirit in us which restricts us to use the services of our immediate surroundings to the exclusions of a more remote. Localization is an ethical and ecological imperative. It reduces our ecological footprint while opening opportunities for creative, meaningful work, producing quality and enhancing well-being. It fixes the broken circle between production and consumption. The current system is based on the separation of the producer, the consumer, which produces, and the earth being exploited, and consumers being driven by thoughtless consumerism based on the illusion of cheap, globally traded and industrially produced and distributed food and clothing appeared cheap because the cost to society and the planet are not taken into account. Consumerism is the social addiction of junk which keeps the money machine running. True cost shows that the ecological and local, the fossil-free non-industrial system work better for the planet, for producers and consumers. The cheap of a corporate-driven globalized economy is extremely costly. When true cost accounting is done, we have calculated 1.3 billion as the true social and ecological cost of chemical farming in India annually. If the death of Indian farmers growing BT cotton and the death of women workers in Bangladesh garments factories were internalised in the cost of what we wear, no one could afford the cheap clothing of big chains. If the destruction of small farms, the uprooting and displacement of farming communities, the desertification of soil, the disappearance of biodiversity, the torture of animals in factory farms, the distribution of the climate, the disease epidemics were internalised in the cost of what we eat, the cheap food grown with Monsanto's chemicals and GMOs traded by Cargill, retailed by Walmart and Amazon, produced by Nestle's and Pepsi would be unaffordable. If feeding the world was the goal, those corporations would not need to make local sustainable alternatives illegal. As E.F. Schumer, and that's the author of Small is Beautiful and Buddhist Economy, points out, simplicity and non-violence are the basis of an economy of well-being, and such an economy must be localized. From the point of view of Buddhist economists, production for local resources, for local needs, is the most rational way of economic life, while dependence on imports from afar and the consequent need to produce for export, to undertake and distract and distant peoples is highly uneconomic and justifiably only in exceptional cases and on a small scale. New forms of totalitarian control are being created through new methods of extracting super profits from society, new convergence of technologies and new concentrations of power. The guiding principle of corporate globalization is centralized, industrialized and mechanized modes of production. Gandhi turned this principle on its head and envisaged a decentralized, homegrown, handcrafted mode of production. In his words, not mass production, but production by the masses. I have never thought of the word protectionism as negative. Protecting the earth, our homes, our families, our cultures is a duty that is vital to sustain our lives ecologically and socially. Swadeshi, or economic democracy based on local economies, is also necessary to prevent the rise of xenophobia and hate in this age of discontent with dominant systems. While an anti-globalisation and anti-immigrant rhetoric dominated the Brexit vote and the US presidential election 2016, went hand in hand with further integration of the global financial system and a politics of hate, Worst, while keeping people divided, it institutionalised more deeply the rule of the 1% and immunity for the billionaires. People voted for change, but they got more of the same. In Earth democracy, no species and no culture is expendable. Diversity ensures balance. Balance ensures that no single species, no one culture dominates the rest. That is why real democracy, diversity and decentralisation go hand in hand. Gandhi's notion of Swaji simultaneously indicates a path of freedom from the empire as well as a path to freedom from hate. To reject foreign manufacturers merely because they are foreign and to go on wasting national time and money in the promotion in other countries of manufacturers for which it is not suited would be criminal folly and a negation of the Swadeshi spirit. A true votary of Swadeshi will never harbour ill will towards the foreigner. He will never be and will not be accoutred by antagonism towards anybody on earth. Swadeshi is not a cult of hatred, it is a doctrine of selfless service and has its roots in the purest Ahimsa love. Ahimsa, i.e. love. I will follow the Swadesh doctrine. It would be your duty and mine to find out neighbours who can supply our wants and to teach them to supply them where they do not know how to proceed, assuming that they are neighbours who are in want of healthy occupation. Then every village in India would almost be a self-supporting and self-contained unit, exchanging only such necessary commodities with other villages where they are not locally producible. In such an economic system, there will be organic relationships between production, distribution and consumption. Satyagrtha, the resurgence of real resistance, real democracy. Satyagraha, or the force of truth, was Gandhi's word for non-cooperation. Was Gandhi's word for non-cooperation, which with and non-participation in systems, structures, laws, paradigms and policies that destroy the earth and rob us of our humanity and our freedom. Satyagrtha is the deepest practice of democracy. I know from the highest consciousness the moral duty not to cooperate with unjust and brute law and explorative and undemocratic processes. Higher moral law compels citizens to disobey lower laws and institutionalise unjust and violence. Thoreau puts it succinctly: the only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think is right. It is truly enough said that I cooperate has no conscience, but a corporate of consciousness men is a corporation with a conscience. Law never made men a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. I would add that as long as the superstitious existence that the fictions and illusions of the 1% must be believed in and be allowed to destroy real knowledge, real intelligence, real wealth and real freedom, our slavery of the 1% will persist. As slaves to the edifice of illusions that create the mechanical mind and the money machine, we become complicit in the process that are destroying the earth and humanity. But Satyagrtha, a non-corporate passive resistance, did not begin with Gandhi or Thoreau. It has been the deepest democratic practice through the ages to defend freedom. Gandhi himself acknowledged that he did not invent Satyagraha. It means he learnt it from the people of India, as he writes in Hind Swaji. The fact is that in India, the nation at large has generally used passive resistance in all departments of life. We cease to cooperate with our rulers when they displease us. This is passive resistance. Satyagarbha is more important than ever today in our age of post-truth. It was and has always been about awakening our consciousness and our inner power to resist an externally imposed cruel and unjust system. So I will leave it there for now.